Hello, and welcome back to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. I'm Cam, and this video we will be reading Genesis chapter 47. Then Joseph came and told Pharaoh, and said, My father, and my brethren, and their flocks, and their herds, and all that they have are come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen. And he took some of his brethren, even 5 men, and presented them unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto his brethren, What is your occupation? And they said unto Pharaoh, Thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. They said moreover unto Pharaoh, For to sojourn in the land are we come, for thy servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, Thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee. The land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land make thy father and brethren to dwell. In the land of Goshen let them dwell. And if thou knowest any man of activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle. And Joseph brought in Jacob his father, and set him before Jacob, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Jacob, How old art thou? And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the lives of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and went out from before Pharaoh. And Joseph placed his father and his brethren, and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph nourished his father and his brethren, and all his father's household, with bread according to their families. And there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very sore, so that the land of Egypt and all the land of Canaan fainted by reason of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the corn which they bought, and Joseph bought the money into Pharaoh's house. And when money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came unto Joseph and said, Give us bread, for why should we die in thy presence? For the money faileth. And Joseph said, Give your cattle, and I will give you for your cattle, if money fail. And they bought their cattle unto Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for horses, and for the flocks, and for the cattle of the herds, and for the asses, and he fed them with bread for all their cattle for that year. And when that year was ended, they came unto him the second year, and said unto him, We will not hide it from my lord, how that our money is spent. My lord also hath our herds of cattle. There is not aught left in the sight of my lord, but our bodies and our lands. Wherefore shall we die before thine eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh, and give us seed, that we may live, not die, that the land be not desolate. And Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians sold every man his field, because the famine prevailed over them, so the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he removed them to cities from one end of the borders of Egypt, even to the other end thereof. Only the land of the priests bought he not, for the priests had a portion assigned them of Pharaoh, and did eat their portion with Pharaoh, and did eat their portion which Pharaoh gave them. Wherefore they sold not their lands. Then Joseph said unto the people, Behold, I have bought you this day, and your land for Pharaoh. Lo, here is seed for you, and ye shall sow the land. And it shall come to pass in the increase, that ye shall give the fifth part unto Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be your own, for seed of the field, and for your food, and for them of your households, and for food for your little ones. And they said, Thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. And Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt unto this day, that Pharaoh should have the fifth part, except the land of the priests only, which became not Pharaoh's. And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen. And they had possessions therein, and grew, and multiplied exceedingly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the whole age of Jacob was 147 years. And the time drew nigh that Israel must die. And he called his son Joseph, and said unto him, If now I have found grace in thy sight, put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh, and deal kindly and truly with me. Bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt. But I will lie with my fathers, and thou shalt carry me out of Egypt, and bury me in their burying place. And he said, I will do as thou hast said. And he said, Swear unto me. And he sware unto him, and Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head. Summarizing chapter 47, Joseph took 5 of his brothers and told Pharaoh that they were shepherds. He asked Pharaoh for permission to settle in Goshen, since they have cattle. Pharaoh gives them permission to the best of the land and tells Joseph to give his relatives with a good success rate jobs over Pharaoh's livestock. Joseph brings his father Jacob to meet Pharaoh, who then inquires about his age. Jacob is now 130 years old in verse 9. He blesses Pharaoh. Pharaoh places Joseph in Ramses, which is the best place in Egypt. In verse 20, the famine caused many men to have to sell their land. And it says in verse 15, when their money failed, when their money was spent. Failed means to lose strength, to fade or die away, to stop functioning normally, or to become absent or inadequate. The word fail is used in the King James Version. So when money lost its strength, when money faded or died away, when money stopped functioning normally, when money became absent or inadequate. That's what was happening here during that famine. It became absent, inadequate, or lose strength or stopped functioning normally. Egyptians then begged for food, and Joseph said to trade their cattle, and then he would feed them for the year. But when the second year came, people asked that Pharaoh purchase them and their land in exchange for seeds. They became servants because of the famine. Only priests kept their land and had food. Joseph moved the Egyptians to another part of the country and had them plant their seeds in specific areas, agreeing to give Pharaoh 1/5 of the harvest in verse 24. Priests were exempt from having to do this, having to give up their land, having to forage for food. Priests were protected during the famine. Israel/Jacob lived in Goshen, and Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years. Oh, when Jacob was 147, he asked Joseph to promise him that he would be buried with his ancestors, his father's relatives, and Joseph agreed. A couple of highlights of chapter 47. In chapter 46, verse 34, it ends with shepherding is an abomination to the Egyptians. But when Joseph told Pharaoh about his family, he had such favor with Pharaoh that he told Joseph to put his competent family members in charge of Pharaoh's own livestock. Verse 15, money failed, or money was spent. Spent meaning consumed, exhausted, drained of energy or effectiveness. After the money was exhausted or consumed or drained of energy, they sold their cattle. The Egyptians sold cattle once their money was spent. And then they sold their land and themselves. They sold themselves for seeds, not even for food. Possibly food wasn't available after being fed for so many years, but they sold themselves for seeds. In verse 22, only priests had an allowance from Pharaoh. Only priests or religious officials had an allowance from Pharaoh. They always had food. They didn't have to sell their land. Their status as religious officials granted them permanent advantage and access to resources directly from Pharaoh. And this represents the government. Pharaoh represents the government or the state. So these priests in Egypt had access to resources, didn't have to worry about food because being a religious official, they had an advantage and a privilege to certain things like not having to sell your land. So that was an advantage of being a religious official during that time. Access to resources. Verse 29, hand under thigh sealed a promise. The other time that we've seen this was in chapter 24, verse 9, when Abraham made the servant promise to him that he would find his son Isaac a wife that was a non-Canaanite woman, and he stuck his hand under Abraham's thigh, and that solidified the promise. So that was chapter 47. The next upload will be Genesis chapter 48. Thank you for watching.